And good evening. Welcome to yet another episode of Territories Talk, our second one for today. My name is Chris Famous of Bermuda. And Territories Talk was founded, the online version was founded in 2021 by Shana Smith Archer of the Virgin Islands, um, Eden Harrelson of the Cayman Islands, and myself, Chris Famous of Bermuda Islands. The reason being is that as smaller islands in the Caribbean region, we often, more often than not, are overlooked in the media. The Caribbean itself is not really put in the general media, but we have through technology, StreamYard, Facebook, YouTube, we now have the ability to tell our own stories, our own history, and not only tell it, but through these things, be able to share these stories. So today's episode is very special. It's the first of a series of stories on something that has impacted not just people in the Caribbean, but people in Europe, people in the United Kingdom. And we are talking about the Windrush. For many don't know what the Windrush story is. They don't know what the Windrush legacy is. So I am going to bring in some subject matter experts who I'm very honored to have who have did a lot of work and research on the Windrush issue and what it means to persons across the world. And I'm now going to bring them in. Good evening, ladies. How are you? Or good night in the UK. How are you all doing?
Yeah, good. It is late in the UK, so we've all had a long day of work, but yeah, it's good to be here.
Okay. I'll allow you to please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Claire Fletcher. I'm a solicitor. I work at Brodie Jackson Cantor in Liverpool, in the UK, and immigration law isn't my ordinarily the speciality of law that I work in, but I work pro bono in the in this arena to help victims of the Windrush scandal to obtain just and fair compensation.
Okay, thank you. Hello,
So I'll go next. I'm Rachel Stalker. I'm the subject leader in clinical legal education at Liverpool John Moores University. So like Claire, I'm a solicitor too. I'm based in Liverpool, and the students I work with have been helping Tanika Stevenson and Liverpool Advocates for Windrush in their work with victims of the scandal this year.
Okay.
I am co-founder of Liverpool Advocates Windrush, Tanika Stevenson. I am a barrister unregistered, and with Rachel and Claire, we provide free support to anyone affected by the Windrush scandal in Liverpool. Liverpool Advocates Windrush and Liverpool John Moores University Legal Advice Centre, we have collaborated to offer said services because the area we live in, which is Merseyside, those affected are in the thousands. And if those thousands were to approach law, Liverpool Advocates Windrush, we would be inundated and unable to support them effectively. So going through a student-led clinic, it enables the younger generation to understand and learn just how this institutional scandal or instruments of the state has affected many citizens. Thank you.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is go through a little bit of the backstory of Windrush because, like, I've never did law, but I know lawyers like to bring the backstory so they help to, prove the case to the jury, right? So let's start here. Anyone care to gander what this is about? This was Britain during World War II when it was bombed, right? Britain, as well, none of us were alive at that time, but as we would know, Britain was the subject of relentless bombing from the Germans, and they destroyed many cities in England, Birmingham, Coventry, anywhere where there was industrial London. anywhere where there was industrial or military entities, the Germans, in their efficiency, said, let's destroy that. Along with not just bombing Britain, they destroyed many lives, they destroyed many homes, and the totality of the war, many British persons were killed, such to the extent that after post-World War II, Britain was short of manpower, right? Human capital. They didn't have it. So what did they do? They brought in people from islands, Jamaica, Trinidad, Bermuda even. I'm going to read an excerpt that was sent. And they brought them in on the ship that we call or one of the ships that they brought them in was a ship that we call right, Empire of Windrush. So I will now turn it back over to ladies.
Thank you very much for that overview, Thomas. That is indeed the case. But I would like to go even a bit further back as to how did the Windrush, how did we get to where we are today? It started with World War One, then led into World War II, and a change of legislations over this period. Specifically in 1948, when the Immigration Act came into force, in that if you were a former CUKC citizen in the United Kingdom and colonies, and you were to gain your independence from the UK, then you will then revert, your country will then no longer be a CUKC, but turn a Commonwealth country instead. So that's how we have the two terms, CUKC, or citizens in the United Kingdom and colonies, and Commonwealth. So Commonwealth, the word was born in 1948 through the 1948 Act. And as you know, previous legislations, and if you don't know, for example, like the 1912 Aliens Restrictions Act, which basically was to limit immigrants entering the UK or even landing in the UK, you having to prove have certain credentials and prove certain things. It became harder, more restrictive, which led up to 1962, 1968 legislations, Commonwealth Immigration Acts, and the 1971, which is still in force today and has caused many, many problems, in my opinion, along with the 1983 Act.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else who wish to contribute?
Just to say that obviously the, as you quite rightly said, the Windrush ship is the most famous, but there were actually some ships who brought people over prior to that. Yes, it was essentially to boost Britain's post-war labour shortages and to bring people in to boost the economy. That was certainly the theory behind the arrival of the Windrush in particular.
And Ms. Rachel, no pun intended.
Yes, so Liverpool, where Tanika and Claire and me are sitting this evening, we have very heavy bombing here, and the impact on the infrastructure of our city is still visible today. So that had an enormous impact across the UK, mostly in the bigger cities. And yeah, so that was, people were welcomed, invited to come to the UK from the Commonwealth, from those countries, and not just from Jamaica. That's where most people think of when they hear the word Windrush in the UK. But actually, I think, Tanika, I'm right. It was the Windrush generation is anyone from a Commonwealth country. And that's actually a really long list, a longer list than I realised before I started working with Tanika.
Yeah, because they also, they being the British, they also brought in persons from the damn African colonies, some from the Indian subcontinent, whether it be Pakistan or India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, as we know, East Pakistan, as it was called at one point, Burma, you name it. If you up until World War II, Britain's footprint was one quarter of the earth, right? So they had colonies far and wide, and for whatever reasons, most people, equate the Windrush generation to strictly people who were from the Caribbean, or singularly they think it's just Jamaicans, but it's not. But tell
Thomas,
us,
can I come back in there,
beg
please?
pardon?
Can
Beg
I
pardon?
come back in with another comment? I was asking.
You're on the spotlight. Sorry. Seems she might have dropped out. Might have some. Can you hear me? Hello?
I think we may have lost Tanika. Hopefully she'll make her way back.
Okay. You wish to pick up from where she was being clear? Oh, sorry. Oh, it's Rachel. Sorry.
Not sure what she was going to say, so.
Oh, all right. Well, until she's here, she's back now.
Apologies, all. My internet is playing up. So if it happens again, please know why. What I was wanting to add is that the government here has made it quite clear now that the Windrush generation, for the purposes of Commonwealth nations, are only those who came to the UK between 1948 and 1973. From 1973 to 1988 is the rest of the world, not including those Commonwealth nations. Before that was not clearly stated in any of the schemes. And just one other thing I want to add, Thomas, if I may, for the purposes of the audience, is to list the Commonwealth countries according to the scheme today, both status and rectification scheme. Compensation, sorry, and rectification.
All right.
Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Australia, the Bahamas, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belize, Bermuda, Botswana, British Antarctic Territory, British Indian Ocean Territory, Brunei, Canada, Cayman Islands, Cyprus, excluding the sovereign base area, Dominica, Falkland Islands, Fiji, the Gambia, Ghana, Gibraltar, Grenada, Guyana, Hong Kong, India, Jamaica, Kenya, Kiribati, Lesotho, Malawi, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Mauritius, Montserrat, Namibia, Nauru, New Zealand, Nigeria, Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, Pitcairn, Henderson, Duce, and One Islands, that's one bullet point, St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, St. Lucia, Samoa, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Solomon Islands, South Africa, South Georgia, and South Sandwich Islands, Sri Lanka, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Well,
Internet's dropped out again.
I'm sorry. I was at Swaziland, Tanzania, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Turks and Caicos, Tuvalu, Uganda, Vanuatu, Virgin Islands, Zambia, and Zimbabwe.
Okay. I'm not sure what's happening with her. Anywhere either one of you want to pick up from?
I think, Tanika's, it's quite interesting hearing her read out that list. That is a much longer list than anyone, I think, would expect who hasn't worked on these cases. That is a huge number. You can imagine how many people have come to the UK from those islands. And also, it's not just, places like Bermuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, it's Canada, Australia. That's an exceptionally long list. So it's always eye-opening to hear it, I think.
In addition to that, sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
No, Rachel said it was an exceptionally long list, and I was an exceptionally long list of colonization by one island in Europe. Look at the size of England, the United Kingdom, and say, how did these from one quarter of the world? But that's another topic. But sorry, go ahead, Mr. Tanika.
The other thing I was going to add to that was that according to the government's fact sheet as of today that most successful claimants to the schemes are Europeans or European countries, but not one specific European countries listed there except Malta and Cyprus, but they're coming under Commonwealth. So what are the names of those European countries that have been successful to the scheme so far? So how many countries in reality have been affected, or citizens from these countries? Thank you.
Anyone wish to add anything? Okay, so for historical purposes, let's go back to the way. I can't speak to how others were treated when they reached to the UK, but let's go back to how West Indians were treated when they reached to UK. Anyone know this gentleman?
Mr. Enoch Powell, is it?
Correct. Mr. Enoch Powell was, I'm trying to think of a nice way of putting it. He was a British nationalist who had quite a bit of disdain for persons immigrating to the kingdom. And he wrote a speech called Rivers of Blood. And it basically set the tune. It was like Trump-like tune, I would, for lack of a better term, a Trump-like tune for how people of color, whether they be black, whether they be Indian, persons of color, how they were treated in the UK, which was nasty, right? Some of you all may have seen it. It was a very nasty way, and it's led to, I would say, the climate in which we are in now, or we were in under Theresa May. So, sorry. Go ahead.
I think there is certainly some horror stories from that time. You know, people kind of coming off the ship and looking for places to live and walking past guest houses and shops, and people would have signs in the window to say, you know, no blacks welcome here, that kind of thing. But there you go, you've just popped the exact image up of some of the things that were shown at the time. Yes, and I think that did happen. That wasn't everybody's approach and everybody's perception, and for a lot of people this was a very welcoming environment. But yes, there was certainly the minority that felt that way, and you're right, to some degree that's continued to today, that poor attitude, and certainly reflected in some of our legislation that's been passed since. Okay,
so that's just for historic purposes. We know, it makes no sense recreating the obvious, right? Persons who were not, you may be a British subject, but you're not English. People were mistreated. So let's fast forward to Theresa May and Amber Rudd and their, I think the term was hostile environment that they created. Anyone care to contribute on that?
Yeah. Do you want to have a go, Rachel?
Yeah, just to say that's I will. So the hostile environment, I think it's 2012, that kind of change of approach came in, and what it essentially meant was that it was trying to make the UK inhospitable, shall we say, for people wanting to immigrate here. There's been a real change in the discourse around immigration under the previous government, and immigration was universally being touted as something really negative, which isn't borne out at all by the role of immigrants in the UK, by the way. But there was, that was the rhetoric. The impact of this, though, was that new checks were brought in for people who had not been born in the UK necessarily, but who had emigrated here a long time before, having to do things like provide evidence they had the right to work in the UK. So people suddenly started being asked for their passport, for their identification more, to prove their status as British citizens. Whereas, as Tanika will go into more detail about, because she's the expert on this through her work with LAW, but essentially people who had lived here for many years from the Windrush generation, and their children as well, suddenly had to produce documents they did not have, but not because they weren't British, but because they were never provided with any documentation to prove that they were British. And I think I'm right, Tanika, when people arrived in that Windrush generation from all those many countries that you talked about earlier, sometimes their documents, stating where they'd come from, their tickets, their boarding passes, they were destroyed at the border when they reached the UK. So there was no paper trail for people to produce to show when they arrived and that they had been from a country that conferred British citizenship on them. Tanika, you're the expert on this. If you're back in. Are you there? I think she's having trouble.
Yes, thank you. I am having computer problems tonight, of all the nights. Yes, that is correct, Rachel. What I've learned from research is that people traveled on travel cards, like little pieces of paper, like what they give to the war time, like identification cards. And if you were a minor, you'll come on your parents' card and what's not, but those weren't saved or stored, and some, as we know it as landing cards, were destroyed. We've heard stories that it was allegedly destroyed in a fire that were secured by the Home Office. Others people just didn't keep because they were told that they were British. They had a right of abode as somebody born here because they were citizens in the United Kingdom colonies. Unfortunately, that
anyone wish to pick up from that?
I think just as much to add to that. I think it's this proving status, isn't it? It's the hostile environment suddenly required people to prove citizenship in a way they'd never had to because they were citizens. They were welcomed to the UK as British people. Claire, have you got anything to add to that? I think that's where Tanika was going with it.
And just to say, obviously, it was primarily has been the children of the people who first arrived, because some people did keep some documentation, others were destroyed, but it was the children who arrived with nothing other than what would have been on their parents' documentation. And for those people trying to prove how they arrived here and when, and looking at things like dates and precise information that they then needed, that was impossible and remains impossible for a lot of people even today.
Yeah, because historic purpose, right? Up until 1962 was when Jamaica first became independent. Then there was Trinidad, and then subsequent up to 1979, St. Kitts was the last Caribbean island to go independent thus far. So Jamaica, Trinidad, then Guyana, where Tanika's from, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, St. Kitts, Antigua and Barbuda, they all went independent. But the reality is those who were born in those islands, right, and Belize and Guyana, as we said earlier, those who were born in those islands in this country were born as British subjects, not even citizens. They weren't even equated as citizens. They were called British subjects. Those that migrated to the UK, they went to, for lack of a better term, from a colonial standpoint, they went to their mother country, right? If I was born in Jamaica in 1961, I was born as a British subject. If I migrated I migrated to England as a British subject. I was not the subject of an independent nation. And I think that's how many have been caught up, or according to the UK court out, where you're not a British subject. And how am I not a British subject if my parents were born as British subject and I was born to my parents? How am I not a British subject? You take United Nations says you take the nationality of your parents. Anyway, that's just my that's my layman knowledge of the law, right? Wish to add anything, Claire?
No, not particularly at this point. It's a shame we keep missing Tanika dropping in and out, because she really very much is the expert in this area. I might drop her a message and suggest that perhaps she joins via a phone rather than her computer. That might help with some of the issues she's having. Have you got anything, Rach?
Just to add, yeah, to what you said, Thomas, and I neither Claire nor me are immigration solicitors. It's so if we seem quiet in answering the questions, that's why. But just something which I do know, and which we've come across in some of the Windrush cases we've worked on, if someone had come from a country, a Commonwealth country, which then later, after the person had come to the UK, their home country, for want of a better term, declared independence from the UK and became its own country, then the citizenship of the person in the UK changed, and they were then considered by the government, although no one told the individual concerned. They were they were then a person with citizenship of their original country rather than being British. So I think I'm right in saying, and Tanika will correct me if she's here now, that if I was just saying, Tanika, when someone's country obtained independence from the UK and was no longer a colony, then the person in the UK, their own citizenship changed then, because their original country was independent. Am I putting it correctly? And probably not.
You are. That's spot on. But what's worse is that if you were a citizen, for example, Jamaica, and you were here, you weren't informed. So you just carried on your life thinking that nothing has changed, being a law-abiding citizen. But in reality, that's not the case.
Yeah. So this lady, in 2015, which was, I guess, the crescendo of the hostile environment, one of the things that made me proud as a Caribbean person was that you have what you called every year you have these Commonwealth meetings where all these countries, that extensive list that was read out, they meet in a different Commonwealth country, right? And then 15, the Commonwealth meeting was in London, coincidentally. And all the leaders of the Caribbean islands, the independent Caribbean islands, with the then Prime Minister, Theresa, right? And said, listen, you're not going to be deporting our people out of the UK because they are UK citizens. And through a lot of work from various advocates, and I would say through the Guardian newspaper or website, they emphasized the point. The Windrush issue became the Windrush scandal, right? And the Home Minister was Amber Rudd, right? As it says here, Amber Rudd resigns hours after Guardian published deportation targets letter. It says that UK government was planning on deportation of nationals based off of this this target, right? So she had to resign, and I think she took in my opinion, she took the bullet for Theresa. That's my opinion, right? Question coming in from the Cayman Islands that says, any of you care to address this question?
I didn't have much to add to that, really. It's I think around that time, was it around that time, I think, as well, that the Guardian's Amelia Gentleman's book was published, which there was quite a long series of articles in the Guardian in particular, and a lot of investigative journalism that was done, publicising the sudden difficulties that Windrush generation people had in accessing housing, accessing healthcare, or because due to the hostile environment, they weren't able to evidence the fact that they were British. So that was, it's interesting. You pulled up an article from the Guardian there. It was the Guardian really that was, it was that one of their journalists who really kind of broke the story, and it became common knowledge.
Yeah, and the thing is that with the Guardian, I would say during that time was the leading public advocate, but there was a lot of all of this started from persons such as yourselves and Tanika, who were grassroots advocates for persons who were caught up in the Windrush scandal, right? So I want to thank all of this. I don't know the thousands who.
I think a lot of people thought they were. Oh, sorry. I think a lot of people thought they were the only individual affected as well. Individuals who started having problems proving their status didn't realise that other people were having the same problems, and people were very worried about speaking up and coming forward at first because they just had no idea that it was such a widespread issue. So it gradually became clear through those kind of journalistic attempts.
And I think that the question there from Johan, what's driving the struggle in the UK? Well, the climate has changed so much, and that slideshow that you showed earlier of the image of the window where it was saying no blacks, no Irish. Can't remember the rest of it, but that's not the school of thought anymore. That's not how people think. And people were outraged, and this is a scandal felt by everybody, and certainly is to this day. And you just touched upon advocates and grassroots community support groups. There's so many people who are actively advocating for the victims of Windrush, and it has a huge swell of following and support in the UK. What happened and is still happening was not acceptable, and it's a completely different generation now that is not content with that kind of behaviour and not content to allow it to continue. So although the Guardian originally, that, as Rachel said, that investigative journalism did kick this off, that was just the start. And what's driving the struggle in the UK is simply that we are not happy with that, and we won't allow it to continue.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, anything you wish to share? Anything you wish to add, Rachel?
No, I just wonder whether if Tanika's here, if she wanted to pick up on that.
Thank you, Rachel. I didn't hear the question, so my apologies. I'm just going to keep my camera off in case it's my bandwidth, but I am on my mobile now, so we're going to see how we get on. What was the question?
This is the question. Can you see that?
No, I can't.
Okay, I'll read it out for you. It's a question from Johan Moxon in the Cayman Islands, who coincidentally, drum roll please, is a little condolences on the loss of your footballer. So Johan asks, what is driving the struggle in the UK to formally acknowledge and accept, after all these decades, the Windrush crew and their children?
Thank you. Yes. Okay. I've seen that. So my answer would be the Windrush generation and their descendants, and people, as Claire said, who do not appreciate what is currently happening. We understand it happened in the past. We can't change the past because we're of this era. But we can decide what we're going to accept now, what we're going to let go into our future with us. So that's what's driving the force, or what's driving the struggle in the UK. So From that perspective, we were trying to challenge it. In my opinion, what's driving or causing the struggle, if that's what you meant, Johan, it's the same pieces of legislation and policies that cause the harm to begin with that is still enforced today. So therefore, it'll just keep repeating itself, in my opinion, until those are changed.
Yeah, because wasn't it, and feel free to correct me, right? Wasn't once Theresa May accepted that that the Windrush had become there was talk of compensation, correct?
Yes, not
And how far?
restitution.
Okay, so how come along with restitution and or compensation?
I put in the word restitution because a lot of people at the beginning, including myself, thought it was a restitution scheme. However, that was made clear a few years later. Well, no, it's not, because they're not putting people in the position they would have been in. Instead, you're getting compensated for specific harms that you now have to evidence from 77 years ago if you're that old or young, and more recent. And only when you can evidence it to the satisfaction of those that will be assessing your application would you receive an offer of some sort of remedy. It's not guaranteed either. So those claimants are being, in my opinion, re-traumatized to try to get some form of remedy, an award, which may or may not come for something that they did not do, but was institutional harm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is it a case that so basically they're playing the long game because many of the persons who were harmed are starting to die, correct?
Sadly, yes, and have already passed away, which then makes it a case that if somebody wants to bring a claim on their behalf, they will have to bring it under the deceased estate claim form, and the same evidence that a live or living person would have had to produce, they would have to produce on behalf of that person's estate, which in my opinion, again, makes it much harder, because had that person been alive, they could have given you their accounts firsthand.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's.
And I think, sorry.
Clear.
I was just going to add to what Tanika has just said and what your point was about, the original generation starting to age out and to pass away. And those that are still here and are able to and are willing to complete this application process, a lot of them are digitally excluded. So, they're not familiar, and nor do they want to be with technology or the internet or making applications online or submitting documents. So it's not a simple process, and it hasn't been made simple. And there's lots more that we can talk about in terms of the process itself. But for that generation who, have been through so much already, to contemplate going through this application process, I think is just almost too much. And you can understand why, having, come this far, it's, it's a lot. It's a lot to do.
Okay.
So some of the younger generation and the descendants of the original Windrush are more interested and are more capable of doing so, but that first generation are either unable to or just do not want to put themselves through it. And as Tanika says, it's a re-traumatization process. Having to sit down with somebody who you've perhaps only met once or twice and go through that whole lived experience and to talk about it. And and for some people, they're embarrassed, that they find some shame in making a claim of this nature. It goes against what they think is proper or what they think is right. So you have all those prejudices as well. So you don't just have the Home Office, the British Home Office, who have inflicted this pain in the first place. You then have the very same body who you have to go to effectively with your begging bowl to make things better. And one can understand how somebody doesn't want to go through that process.
Anything you wish to add, Rachel?
Yes, and just to chime in on that, so the form itself is not only online, it's a very kind of difficult process. It's administered by the Home Office, which is the same kind of body that is responsible for the ill treatment that people have suffered. So that is a problem many people have pointed out, and there are calls for an independent body to be the one responsible for dealing with the compensation scheme. And the form itself is very long, even if you can get help. The form is very extensive, and the questions change. The guidance for caseworkers changes regularly without being notified to caseworkers. And there's no legal aid for people who want to go through the process of filling in that form. There's a little bit of free help through the actual scheme, but the actual form takes a lot longer than that to produce. Which is where people like Tanika and Liverpool Advocates for Windrush come in, and then later on, colleagues like myself and Claire and our students who've come in to try and help people go through that process.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about specific, not what we've talked about, the general challenge. Tell us about your organization, Legacies. Let me make sure I'm saying that correctly. Legacy of Windrush organization that's there to assist.
Tanika, do you want to talk about Liverpool Advocates for Windrush?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. It broke up. Can you please repeat, Thomas?
No, I was saying, tell us about the Liverpool. If you hear me stammering when I say Liverpool, it's because I'm a Manchester United fan. But the Liverpool Advocates for Windrush, tell us specifically about your organization.
Okay, yes, with pleasure. Liverpool Advocates for Windrush is a grassroots organization, a constituted group at the moment. And we were born out of necessity, I would say. My colleague and I, co-founders, we, after being in the space from 2018 and 2019 respectively, we've learned in 2023 or by 2023 what worked and what didn't, and what claimants needed in our opinions. However, when we launched Liverpool Advocates for Windrush Law, we realized, well, people still weren't coming forward. Did we get it wrong? Did we assume incorrectly? We then conducted a survey focusing on the Merseyside region, and over 1,200 people, 1,228, but 1,200 for brevity purposes, answered over 46 questions. And you multiply that by the 5 or 6 generations today, that's over 7,000 people, at least, just in the Merseyside region affected. And from that, we as an organization, we try to meet the needs and things that they specify that they wanted and would like to see in that survey. So we are an organization where we're trying to break down barriers. There's deep-seated mistrust with those affected and the government. And in short, we're sort of an intermediary where we're saying it's okay. Unfortunately, the same institution that caused the harm is the same institution you have to go to or submit your applications to. Even though when they're saying one breath, they're not going to deport anyone, and the next day they're putting people on planes and deporting them, you still got to trust them because they're the ones you need to apply to rectify this injustice that has been meted upon you and no fault of your own. So that's who we are as an institution, an organization. And we are keen on collaborative efforts because this is so monumentous and no one organization or one body, in my opinion, can do it alone. So for example, on here, Thomas, you have 3 different organizations collaborating to support people, not only within the Merseyside region, but nationally and even internationally. And I think this is a testament to, if I may say so, the people in the north of England. We're very collegiate, but more importantly, Liverpool. We get down to it and we help, we chip in, we do what we have to do to right any wrongs. In my opinion, I do love Liverpool, so I'm probably being a bit biased. So yeah, that's that's who we are, Thomas.
Yeah, one of the things I know this is a sidebar, but one of the things that I've learned about Liverpool is that you're very non-colonial. Let me put it that way. When it came to singing the national anthem, many people who are in Liverpool are of Irish descent. So it's a very let's just say eclectic celebrate your royalty over there.
Liverpool is a city full of immigrants, and it is all the better for it.
Yeah, I actually have a is from Liverpool, for Liverpool. That's family, grandparents from Ireland. So that. We have a question that came in. It arrived. Well, I don't know if it's but it arrived when the country was 10 years into being very angry about being. Well, you could imagine what they're saying. They're over 2 world wars. The anger. There's another question. Puerto Rico. What are some of the items that indicated that they won in this survey? So on and so forth.
I'll be happy to answer the second one if that helps.
Okay, go ahead.
Changes in policies, for example, more local hubs where people can go and get information, supporting accessing the schemes, or simply interpreting the application forms. A lot of legal practitioners have found, as Rachel said earlier, that as much as it's written in English, it's not simple. You need to read between the lines. We're all on here legally trained, and it is not straightforward. It is not. We've said this time and again. The other thing that people asked for was trauma support. So, Thomas, we're asking people to relive horrible periods in their lives, i.e., like, just for example, sharing it like we're talking here now. But when we come off the call, or they come off the call with us, they have to go and deal with maybe a crying baby or a family or whatever other struggles they may have going on in their lives. There's no mental health support, and mental health struggles are real. PTSD is real. How are those people being supported? Is that another scandal in the making?
Yeah, and the thing that I find, how can I say, ironic, right, is that the UK has been a supporter of Ukraine, rightfully or wrongfully, the support of Ukraine's freedom. And they have found until billions of dollars to give to their defense. UK is a defender of what's going on in Gaza. They are an enabler of what's going on, which is a different topic. But my point is, they're not short of money when it comes to arms, but when it comes to actually compensating those people, that the people and their families that actually rebuilt Britain after World War II, it becomes an issue. Oh, we don't have the money, or we are still looking into that, or the report isn't complete. It's whether it's the Tories or whether it's the Labour government, which you now have, it's the same answer. You're not getting any money. That's what basically telling you. You're not getting any money. But that's just my opinion.
If I can just add to that as well, just to look at the compensation scheme itself, because I just got some up-to-date figures before we came on to speak this evening. So talking about was set up with money set aside. It had a deadline, which has been abolished now. So the scheme is open to be claimed. So far, there's been about 8,000 plus claims under the compensation scheme. 3,000. So only about just over a third of claims are being successfully compensated, and the remainder of claims, people are being told that they're ineligible or they don't have any entitlement to compensation, because it's not just showing you're eligible, it's showing you're entitled. The total compensation paid out under the Windrush compensation scheme so far is £94 million. But that's hugely, the individual payouts people get are hugely varied. And something I know Tanika in particular has seen, people sometimes will approach Liverpool Advocates for Windrush when they've already gone through the scheme process and they've had an offer and they're deciding whether or not they should accept it, because it's often at first quite a low offer. But I think I'm right that when people challenge it, sometimes it can be quite substantial. It can be life-changing amounts of money for the individuals. The issue with this scheme isn't that money isn't set aside, it's that people aren't coming forward to claim it. And the process itself is very difficult for people to navigate. So Liverpool Advocates for Windrush work is, as Tanika said, it's trying to build a bridge and help people feel supported in coming forward to see if they're eligible, and then if they are, to go ahead. And there are certainly aspects of the process which we think could be improved and made easier for people. And there's a lot of people, a lot of research going on in this area, and a lot of publications trying to get the process made better, so that that money that is ring-fenced and set aside there is going to be accessed by people, and it is going to be an amount that really reflects the terrible experiences that they've had.
Anything you wish to add, Claire?
Yeah, and just to build on what Rachel has said, to make that point quite clearly, that the money is there, they have put the money up, but they're making it difficult to get to it. So unlike lots of other compensation schemes that have been set up by the British government for other scandals that have historically formed part of what's happened in the past, there is no legal help available, or there's a very small amount of legal help available if you want to make an application for compensation under the Windrush scheme. And it doesn't feel right to us, and that's part of the reason why Tanika co-founded LAW and why Rachel and I support her in that work, is because it just feels inherently wrong that out of all of the other compensation schemes, all of which have legal help, this one doesn't. And for all the reasons that we've talked about, there are lots of barriers and factors that are already in the way to preventing the Windrush generation in making these claims. And this is just another barrier, and another thing that gets in the way of allowing them to do so. And so I work for free when I do this work alongside my other work, because it's wrong and it needs to be righted. So there's lots of work going on behind the scenes, and lots of people doing some wonderful research and presenting ideas that the government can do to make this better, and campaigning for legal help. But it's not there, and it should be. And it's the only compensation scheme currently being run by the UK government that doesn't have legal assistance. And what's that if not indicative of all the past injustices? It's just adding another layer to it. So the money's there, accessing it is pretty tough.
Yeah, because what about just in comparison to the postmaster scandal? Do they have legal help?
Yes, they do. There has been other problems with that particular compensation scheme, primarily around the length of time it's taking for them to make those payouts, but they are being supported, yes.
Okay.
Unlike the Windrush.
Okay. I just want to fast to the event coming up, I think.
Yes. We're excited to announce that we're going to be hosting a panel event. Yes, I'll let you go, Thomas. Sorry. I got excited there for a second.
No. I was just bringing up the picture.
Okay, thank you. The legacy of Windrush. What Windrush is really about. As we mentioned earlier, the name Windrush was a ship, MV Empire, that the people in 1948 first came on, but they came on other ships and other means of transportation, like British Airways. But it's not called a British Airways scandal, for example. So Windrush is just the name of a ship, and I don't think it particularly commemorates or represents the harm. But nonetheless, just by way of a tangential point, is that it wasn't only Commonwealth citizens who came on MV Empire Windrush. There were Polish citizens. There were other citizens of other nations. But we only hear, as Rachel said earlier too, about Jamaica. Jamaica is a Caribbean island, not the entire 65 countries listed in its schemes, excluding the European countries. So we're going to explore the legacy of Windrush. What is Windrush really about? And we're honored to have you as one of the panelists, Thomas, to really explore from a Caribbean perspective or a Commonwealth perspective what is happening in countries like Bermuda. And for the other panelists that we do have, both local or national panelists, from a legal perspective, why is legal representation so important? As Claire said, like the post office scandal, they had legal representation, but there's none for the Windrush schemes. And everyone that has taken up the mantle to fight or support those affected, they're doing it off of their own backs. Like Claire, for example, Claire's a practicing solicitor who is on the COVID inquiry and the Hillsborough, pushing for the Hillsborough law and the duty of candor legislation. But she's still volunteering her time. Rachel, giving us a space as a constituted group, a grassroots organization within her legal clinic, and providing students at University LGMU. We're so grateful, but we need more people like them out there because it is real and it affects thousands of people. Those are some of our panelists. And I am so proud and pleased. I don't know if I should say now. I think we'll wait for an announcement later. But each and every one of those individuals and the panelists is just amazing individuals, in my opinion. And I'm looking forward to have them, including Shane Smith, who is a client of ours and has been affected traumatically.
Yes.
Claire is supporting him, so I can let Claire speak a bit more on that. But Thomas, it is real. The struggle is real.
All right. Thank you for inviting us, I should say.
We're honored to have you, and thank you for accepting.
Okay.
Also, if I may add, it's going to be hybrid. So we're going to have a link that anyone in the islands or anywhere can join online, tune in and listen as you have today. And in persons, we're going to send an invitation to specific invitees.
All right.
Thank you.
Claire, you want to speak on your client, Shane? Oh, if it's sub judice, don't say it. But
Yes, I can tell you a bit about Shane. So Shane is a relatively young man in his early 40s. He was born in Trinidad and Tobago to a British mother who was born in Liverpool. He came back to Liverpool on his mum's British passport when he was a couple of weeks old and lived in Liverpool for the next 25, 30 years. He went to school, he benefited from the National Health Service, he got his national insurance, he had higher education, and then he went on to the world of work. And then two momentous incidents happened to him. One, he applied for a British passport in his 30s, only to be told he wasn't eligible. And then there was a catalogue, a cascade of problems for him where his employer brought him into the office one day and said, "You don't have a right to work. We're being told by the Home Office that we can't employ you anymore." And very, very quickly, his life unravelled in a horrible way. He lost his job, he lost his home, he lost access to his child because he didn't have a supportive environment. He you know, he tells some terrible stories of having to go down to London to the embassy of Trinidad and Tobago, where they said to him, well, you don't sound like you're from Trinidad and Tobago. And of course he doesn't. He has the best Scouse accent of anyone I've ever met. And, you know, he was under threat of being deported to a country that he'd never lived in. You know, as far as he was concerned, he'd lived his whole life believing that he was a British citizen. His mum no longer had the passport that she came back to the UK with, that he was on. So he had no documentation whatsoever to prove when he arrived in the country, when he came here. And there was a very long, awful battle for him where he was effectively homeless. And when he talks about that, he talks about some really, really dark times in his life, and it's difficult to listen to. And, you know, he talks about the fact that nobody could help him. And this was an emerging scandal at the time. So he was finding it really hard everywhere he turned to, his MP, his local councillor, local law support, that they weren't able to help him. Sorry, I should have left his MP out of that, because ultimately his MP did help him. And after a very long battle, you know, his position was restored and he got his passport. And But to this day, he has a safe installed in his home, and he keeps that passport in that safe because he still lives with this fear that one day someone's going to knock on his door and they're going to take it away from him. And hearing him talk about what this has done to him, the emotional impact, the impact on his mental health, the impact on him to gain employment again, and what he went through is just, it's so hard to hear. So at the moment, we are working with Shane, trying to do his application for compensation under the scheme. It's very difficult because it's evidence-based. So we have to go back years and years trying to get evidence of welfare benefits payments, employment, medical information, and it's been really, really difficult to obtain that information. And that demonstrates how hard it is for people to make these applications, because I'm a lawyer, I do this every day, and it's still been really, really hard, and it's taken a really, really long time. So you can understand how people think to themselves, I've had enough of this, you know, this is too long, it's too arduous, it's too difficult. You know, I don't have that paperwork from 20 years ago. I don't have that slip of paper. I don't have that tenancy agreement from when I first came here or when I moved north. I just don't have that information. So it's difficult. And what's interesting about Shane is, for a lot of people who read about the Windrush scandal, they do think about the first people who arrived on that ship. They don't think about the descendants. They don't think of young men like Shane who are in this position. So he is a real advertisement for the fact that this is not a scandal that ended with people who walked off that ship, and in fact previous ships. It's carried on through generations, and is still causing that amount of pain. And that is such a hard thing, I think, to hear about and listen to. And Shane, fortunately, has become a wonderful advocate for the compensation scheme and for the Windrush generation in general. And he's done some wonderful work with the support of Tanika and of Rachel. And, you know, we're nearly there, which is great. And he's a panelist at the event, so hopefully you'll get to meet him, albeit probably virtually. Sorry, I went on a long time there, but as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about Shane's story, as Rachel and Tanika are as well, because he really has embodied it for me, what this is about, where the injustices have laid, and what we can do collectively to make that better.
Okay, thank you. As we close up, Rachel, anything you want to add as we close up?
The only thing I want to say is that I count myself very lucky to have met Tanika and started working with Liverpool Advocates for Windrush, and to have the support of lawyers like Claire. We've also got Lee Day helping us, Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit, lots of individuals giving their time for free to support people trying to get redress through the compensation schemes in the Northwest, in Liverpool. So far, a lot of the focus has been on London, it's been on government. So it's great to be able to give people in Liverpool a voice. So we're very proud to work with Tanika and Liverpool Advocates for Windrush and everyone who supports them.
Tanika, any closing remarks?
Just to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to begin this very important discourse. A lot of people, when you say about Windrush, are like, oh, I thought that was sorted years ago. What's that? Is that still a thing? A lot of people don't know what it is. Or when you start to explain, like, oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't know, because it's not in the public, in my opinion, enough compared to the other scandals, which have been birthed much longer, but are still very much alive. Like, for example, yesterday at Prime Minister's questions, the leader of Liberal Democrats, Ed Davies, listed off all the scandals but Windrush scandal in Parliament that should come under the Hillsborough Law now, the duty of candor to the Prime Minister. And that was, in my opinion, just an example of how it is far from people's minds. And these are the people, or that's the place where laws and legislations are made. And it needs to be in our MPs and everyone else's mind that if we're going to have any redress, we need to start there, but recognize that it affects everyone, our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues. A lot of people are living in silence and in fear, and that needs to stop. But thank you very much for hosting us, having us, and we look forward to being on here again and continuing this very, very important discourse. And also on the 30th of July, when we will be going even deeper. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, so we have a person that's been sending his comments, and basically the comments have been that he starts off by saying that it was all a big misunderstanding. Black people have taught the children we hate them ever since. It's very sad. And he goes on, and he says, I shouldn't say he, but the person goes on to say, grifters, the lot of you solving the problem would only lose you your income. I say that it's important to highlight that because this person, how can I say, they took their time to write this. They took their time to ventilate how they feel about the Windrush issue. Is as if it's a non-issue. It's all a big misunderstanding. And as you've articulated clear, no pun intended, is that these things really affect people. Shane lost his income, he lost his home, he lost the ability to take care of his child because the immigration issue didn't allow him to be a British citizen, right? As you said, he had the best Scots accent. So as I said in the beginning, this is just in the cricket sense, this is just the opening bat. We shall continue the conversation. Before we when people do think of Windrush, they think, oh, it's just people from Jamaica, right? And we have a historian in Bermuda, well, he passed, but Mr. Ira Phillip, he wrote something a few years ago. And he said, we will be aware that Britain was a major player in transatlantic slave trade. I guess that was a big misunderstanding as well. British ships, as noted by historian Nigel Tatterfield, carried 2.6 million enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. Another British ship that featured in contemporary British history was MV British Empire, a regular visitor to Bermuda. For those that look at a map, Bermuda is midway between Europe and the West Indies. So ships back then had to stop in Bermuda. Her most famous trip was in June of 1948. Bermuda was her last stop before London, as she carried 500 immigrants who had been recruited in the West Indies to help rebuild post-war Britain. They were all Black men except for one child and fewer than a dozen. Right? Were on the ship were actually 8 Bermudians. Now, there's some question about how they got on the ship, but we'll leave that for the next episode because that in itself is a story worth telling. So I say that to say Windrush affects all of us. So, ladies, thank you for being on here, and thank you for telling your story. And we shall continue not just with the historic part of Windrush, but the contemporary part of Windrush.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Claire. I know it's late in where you all are. Thank you for staying up late. Thank you for hitting the coffee. Claire, Rachel. And again, to the people in Liverpool or Liverpool fans, so again, condolences on the loss of. Thank you for this that send in the comments. You'll hear from Roslyn from Puerto Rico, and I don't know what to call it, how I see this from, but thank you even for him for helping to bring a point. All right.